of a two-part series that we're doing in partnership with the Society for Development Israel. This session is devoted to the challenges and opportunities of fundraising at this moment. It is specifically geared towards Israeli NGOs in the development and humanitarian aid sector. If you're part of a larger circle, we are welcome too. We are honored to be hearing from two people today who I've known for a long time. One is Mandie Winston, who is currently the chief executive at UJIA, which is she is currently based in London, but is Israeli, made Aliyah years back. And perhaps Mandie will share a little bit more about UJIA's work, but it is a central institution in the British Jewish community. And so she has a good perspective on British Jewish community philanthropic trends, but Mandie is no stranger to OLAM or SID. She worked for many years at JDC, most recently as executive director of JDC Grid, overseeing their humanitarian aid and international development work. She also has a master's in development economics and sits on the board of Nala Foundation, which is both a SID and OLAM partner. And we are also lucky to have with us Erin Zaikis, who currently serves as the Senior Director of Global Corporate Partnerships at HIAS, which also is both an OLAM and a SID partner. In addition to that, she is an independent consultant in the realm of fundraising and is also a long-standing OLAM partner and member. This conversation today around fundraising, I think we're in the thick of this, and it is an evolving situation. And so we brought in two people that I hope will be able to share their unique perspectives, but we're going to carve out a really significant amount of time for what I'd like to call conversation or dialogue and less Q&A, because I think there's a lot of collective wisdom in this room and space. I think some of the things that we've been hearing at OLAM and SID is that there are Israeli partners of ours who are directly responding to the war, and many of them have been successful in their fundraising efforts in Israel, but are trying to recalibrate and balance what that means in terms of their global work. And for those of our Israeli partners who are staying within their lane, focused exclusively on their work overseas, this has been perhaps a challenging time in terms of fundraising, whether from Jewish philanthropy or from non-sectarian philanthropy. So I'm really excited to open up this call. We're going to first hear a presentation from Mandie, where she'll share some of the theoretical or big picture trends that she's seeing. Then we'll turn over to Erin, who will share her perspective as well and give some practical tips. And then we're going to open it up to conversation. And finally, we'll hear from Tanya Merkis, the CEO at SID-Israel, who will share some concluding thoughts as well as next steps. Mandie, the floor is yours.
Shalom, everybody. I'm going to speak in English if that is okay, but I understand Hebrew and I can take any comments in Hebrew as well. I think most people here are Hebrew speakers. I think the first thing I want to say, I know that many of you are Israelis or living in Israel, which is that these are times like none of us can remember, including people who are as old as I am and people who are older than me. And that we cannot, us in the diaspora outside of Israel, don't understand fully. We can have solidarity, we can have empathy, but we cannot pretend or should ever try to understand exactly what it's like being in Israel at this moment. And that's obviously saying that from a perspective that there are people living in diaspora who also know people who are very deeply impacted. So I just wanted to start by saying that not only is the philanthropic market shifting, changing, adapting in really unexpected ways. You're dealing with all of that and the challenges to your organization in the context where I know that you have tremendous demands on you as individuals. Okay. And if you're like anybody else, I know you're also thinking about the person who's more deeply impacted than you are, right? And we're all carrying a certain layer of guilt at the moment. But what I wanted to do, I think, was to start, and I do want to hear from you and to make this a conversation, because I'm not sure I fully understand the depth of challenge that you might be facing. But this is how the conversation has gone in the British Jewish community. There are a number of different conversations. A conversation with an organization that raises money for children with special needs within the Jewish community would turn around to an organization like UJIA, which we're raising a lot of money at the moment for emergency and long-term needs in Israel, and say, we're being really deeply impacted. We're really worried about our ability to support sick young Jewish people in our community because of the attention that's been focused on Israel. Okay, and that's just one example. That's one narrative that's happening. Within Israel organizations, and I can talk from the organization that I work in, where fundraising for Israel has been incredibly challenging before October 7th, because of the judicial reform and people's disconnect with Israel. I don't know whether that's something you've come across. So within an organization that is also raising money specifically for needs in Israel, there's another dynamic, which is one I'm sure that you appreciate and understand, which is, oh my goodness, we're raising all this money to respond to emergency needs. In our case, our budget has doubled. Our yearly budget will double this year. But actually, I still need to pay salaries, right? I still need to do all my other work. And I'm doing that with the same amount of capacity. And my point here is that even if you are an organization where your primary messaging is around Israel, or whether you are serving a different population in the Jewish community, or like you are doing, which is serving populations with an Israeli face who are not Jewish, who are in the developing world, there are challenges because the philanthropic landscape has shifted. And the question that we all need to ask ourselves, which I think the answer is clear, is there enough money to go around? But actually that question is there enough money to go around to make all the needs, has always been there, because we had this conversation 24 months ago about Ukraine, okay, and the huge outpouring of resource into Ukraine. So while this crisis and the crisis in Israel and its impact on the philanthropic, particularly the Jewish Israeli space, is huge, to give a positive picture, I would say a couple of things. One is, this is not the first time we've been here. Like, there are always distractions. Okay, sometimes they work in our favor, sometimes they don't. Secondly, this conversation, you're not the only people who are thinking about this and the challenges to raising money for your work in this particular political context and the war. And the third thing I would say, which I think is really important, is we can think about fundraising strategy and tactics. And I know that Erin's going to go into some of this, but we also need to think about our messaging. And actually, what is it about this current situation which actually bolsters the messages that you are able to give about your work? Right? Is there something there that actually allows you, when you're talking about your work to your existing donors, to potential donors, that actually makes it more compelling? Okay, particularly when we think about the long term. So I'm going to open that as a question, if that's okay with Deanna. Is there something in terms of how are you shifting your organizational narrative when you're talking to your stakeholders around October 7th and its aftermath? I can repeat the question. How are you shifting your organizational narrative, okay, post October 7th, when you're talking about the work that you do, the really important work in outside of Israel as Israeli organizations, to your stakeholders? And does that look different, for example, with different stakeholders? So I'm going to open it up. Anybody who wants to come off mute and share some response to that, I'd be really interested to hear it. I'm going to wait until somebody says something interesting. Okay, I only do uncomfortable silences for a minute.
I'm happy to share.
Maximum.
I mean,
Thank
my
you.
My organization, it's called the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development, and part of the way that we've sort of shifted our narrative has been emphasizing the work that we do with Muslims and Palestinians, which is a counterpoint to the violence that's taking place. We're not involved in, in relief work, et cetera, but the work that we're doing of bringing people together is a counterpoint to the war.
And what kind of reactions, what kind of responses are you getting to that at the moment? Does it feel different in any way to, I mean, I presume that's always been part of the way that you've talked about the organization. You're emphasizing a slightly different part of it, but how do people respond?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't seen increased philanthropic support for this because, this idea of shared society and coexistence is sort of very far from the current war. But we're still sharing that narrative.
Okay. All right, and I think that's really important that actually you don't, when we talk about shifting messaging, that you don't need to compromise your values or your principles that underpin your work. Okay, now, and we're seeing lots of different things. So I think there isn't one set of opinions about what's happening in Israel. It might feel like that sometimes. I just came from Manchester and Leeds last week doing fundraising, and it feels like a very different kind of community to the one I sit in London. So different communities definitely have different vantage points. But essentially, you can also, where are the points you can dig into in terms of where you've got really consistent, long-standing understanding of where your impact is and how you can continue to share that. Okay, so digging into the fact that actually at this time more than ever, coexistence, shared society, Israelis supporting Muslims, Jews supporting Muslims, however you want to put it, is something that people can relate to, a particular type of person, I would say at the moment as well. But, again, I'm identifying those people. So that's one. Anybody else, any kind of other narrative that you're kind of trying to emphasize in terms of navigating any kind of change in the philanthropic marketplace since October 7th?
I can share. We haven't done this yet, but we've talked about it internally. I think within certain segments of the Jewish community, there is a sense that the world hates us. And so what does it look like to emphasize deep relationships that exist as a result of ongoing community development efforts? Meaning not to like have a simple narrative saying, oh, development work fights anti-Semitism, but actually, what does it look like to tell stories about deep and ongoing relationships to sort of counter that narrative that it's us in the world? And that's something that we've been thinking about internally at OLAM, and whether there's a role that we can play in supporting our partners to amplify some of those stories about real relationships, which is in part, I think, what Yonatan was talking about also in terms of their interfaith work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I would go a little bit further. I would say two things on that. One is, I mean, I can't believe I'm actually about to call myself a veteran of this work, but I guess I am. But those of us who've been in this space, Israelis doing development work for, in my case, 2 decades. I know there are people on this call who've been doing it for longer. The outpouring of support from non-Jews of all faiths, from countries that I've worked in that came in on October 8th, 9th, and 10th, and even beyond that, is astonishing. Okay, people I've not heard from for years, okay, but that felt that. Now, what is that worth? What is that important? But that is actually really important for potential donors to hear about in response to that isolation, that actually other people do care. We've I think, very much slipped into this narrative, both in Israel and in the diaspora, of being isolated. Why have UN women not spoken up in time? Why has this agency not done this? Why has, so I think that's important. I would also go one step further. I think that this idea that many of you, I don't know whether it's as popular as it used to be, but that Israel still is a light to the nations, and Israel still should be a light to the nations, and Israel still can be a light to it, still resonates with particularly diaspora Jewry. Okay. And that notion, for people particularly, and those of you who raise money from diaspora Jews, is being battered. Okay, it really is. It's like people feel like they're under attack, that this notion is under attack. So actually, people have this aspirational notion of Israel. And a part of that is also the narrative around the war, which is, good fighting evil, whether you agree with that, whether you don't agree with that. But that concept of Israel being a force of good is there and needs to be broadened out to the rest of the world. So these are, again, messaging, things that, you know, when I talk about, I'm going to talk about Nala for a second. I hope you don't mind, Michal. And I wouldn't normally give an anecdote that is this shallow. But my child just turned 13, and for his bar mitzvah project, he raised money for Nala. Okay. And I gave him the option. I said, would you want to raise money for Israel? Because he's Israeli. We're Israeli. We spend a lot of time in Israel. And obviously there are tremendous needs. He said, no, mummy, because everybody's focusing on Israel. I want to make sure that people from Israel continue to do good in the world. Now, the educational process I attribute to Michal, not to me as a parent. It sounds more impressive than it really is. But actually, the reason I bring that here is because there are still people out there who want to be thinking and who need to be thinking about the day after. There are tremendous needs in Israel, but we as a community, as a global Jewish community, have always dealt with having multiple needs. Okay, and it is our job to talk about the fact there are multiple needs. And that includes putting forward the needs that we see in the world and how we, as Israeli development organizations, respond to them. So anybody else in terms of shifting of messaging, or even, you know, even sharing some of the difficulties that you've had as you've started to approach people. I imagine the institutional donors are also also tricky at the moment. And there's a distinction between approaching non-Jewish institutions or and your specific Jewish donors who may give to you for more emotional reasons. But anything else that anybody wants to share? Tanya?
So I'll share, actually not from our perspective as well, but as things we've heard from different community members. We've seen people shift, okay, it's not messaging even, it's shift their work and work within Israel because they realize that they're going to raise more money by responding to Israel. It's not just that. Obviously, they want to respond to Israel and help out at home, but shift and work within Israel more than they might have because of fundraising. That's one. We've also heard from partners who might kind of lower their head or lower the way they present themselves because of different funders and partners, international partners. And we've also heard the flip side of, no, this is who we are, this is our messaging, this is what we do, and take it or leave it. I'm not sure there's a right or wrong. I think there's different organizations are trying different things to see how they can just stay strong in what they're doing and stay the course.
I think that's very true, but I do so, and I'm going to hand over to Erin in a second. But I think what I wanted to convey here is we always talk about the quoting Amos Avgad, disaster or development as opportunity, right? There's always opportunity in difficult times. And I'm not talking about exploiting the horrific events of October 7th or their aftermath. But there is also, for those people who have pivoted and have actually taken their skill set and they have been working in Israel, there's also an opportunity. Those people are supporting that work. Then the question becomes, how do you take those people and how do you educate them about the other pieces that you're doing outside of Israel? How do you educate people? How do you take them on that journey? How do you shift? Because the thing that they are approaching is not just an opportunity to make and have impact on an issue. It's also they're funding you because they want to be funding you. And therefore, that transition of those people who are maybe focusing on supporting specific things in Israel at the moment, there is an opportunity to shift them out to the stuff which is really your core and what you want to be doing. So I think let's shift now to Erin and talking about some more the practical pieces. I think my last statement on this, I think you're in a really difficult situation. I think because of the work that you do is so important. And I think the worst thing to be doing at the moment is not to be talking about it. So I think in the very early days of October 7th, there were these feelings that you can't talk about anything else, that nothing else is relevant, that we can't celebrate, that we can't have, we've shifted away from that, and it doesn't detract from the plight of the hostages, the situation in Gaza, the difficulty with trauma in Israeli society. All of that stays, but there is a legitimacy, and it is okay from where I sit to be talking about this and always recognizing the context in which it is. But I would very much urge people to carry on talking about the important work that they are doing, because not to do so, I think, isn't doing, from my perspective, certainly not the global community any favors, but the Jewish people is not actually helping us at the moment. We also need to be looking externally, and when we're so internally focused. So that would be what I would encourage you to do. But I will put myself on mute and I'll pop in again in a little bit.
Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Mandie.
Erin.
Oh, thank you. I learned so much just from those few minutes. And it's an honor to be here with you all today. And I'd love to just start by acknowledging all the incredible work that you do. I've long been a member of OLAM, and I know about almost all of your organizations. And I just want to say that I'm grateful to be here with you. I hope I can be helpful and a resource to you all. The work that you're doing is truly, really difficult. It's difficult to do this in good times, and it's incredibly difficult to do that now. So I just want to acknowledge what you're going through individually, as a society, and all of us as Jewish people. So my goal for today is to give you some like trends on giving that I'm seeing with my role at HIAS, and then to kind of just throw a bunch of ideas at you, and feel free to take what sticks and trash the rest. I hope that I can, say at least one or two things that you think, hey, maybe that's a good thing to implement. And I'll also drop my contact information in the chat, so you can be in touch with me at any time. I will try to respond to you quickly. So I'm Erin Zaikis. My role is the Senior Director of Global Corporate Partnerships at HIAS. So at HIAS, I oversee corporate funding in 25 of our country offices. So that includes Israel, but it also includes Ukraine, Venezuela, Costa Rica, the US. So I get to have a nice sense of what's going on in terms of where money's flowing within the Jewish world, but also with government funding, institutional donors, things like that. I will say it's a particularly difficult time to fundraise now in the international development space. And I'm even seeing that with the work that we're doing in Ukraine. We see a lot of funds for Ukraine drying up as the news and headlines shift towards what's going on in Israel. So if you're seeing funds dry up, you're not alone. And that's really unfortunate, but I do want to let you know that it's never been harder in some ways to fundraise for international development work. We're also heading into an election cycle. So you'll see a lot of Americans in particular thinking locally, donating politically, and in the other 3 years, they would be donating internationally. So that's also something to flag as the year goes on. Why you might be seeing some rejections. As an organization that's based in DC, which HIAS, our headquarters is, we're particularly susceptible to that, and a focus on domestic giving right now. I would also say that it's particularly important right now to appeal to Jewish donors, which I'm sure you usually are anyways, but I think that Jews, at least in America, are feeling particularly lonely and isolated. And so things that tug on their Jewish identity are really important right now. So in a way, that is an opportunity for you to, engage with donors. Now I'd like to go into some things that you can try and general advice that I have with the fundraising clients that I have, and now I get to share that with you. So the first thing is, like Mandie said, now is the time to engage with people. Now is the time to re-engage with donors. Anyone who's given you money in the past year or 18 months, this is a perfect time to write them a note, a heartfelt note, ask how they're doing, maybe share something about how you're doing, and ask for a contribution. When I make email asks, I often give like a few different options. So one could be, can you join our monthly giving group? Another could be, could you make a gift that matches what you made last year? And the third could be, I noticed you work at Pfizer, and I know that they have a corporate match program. Would you be willing to not donate anything, but just submit the corporate match form to your employer? It's really helpful to, like, I go into every meeting with at least 3 asks, and at least one of them has to be a non-financial one, because you'll find that sometimes people just don't want to be asked for money, but they don't mind sending in a form. Another thing you can do is check on the website, double the donation, and see if they have matching programs at the companies that they work at. Or sometimes these companies have programs like Apple and Microsoft, where if people volunteer with you, you get paid per hour that they do. So you could also ask them to engage in that way, and it's no money coming out of their wallet. So helpful to have that. I would say, when in doubt, over communicate with donors, not under communicate. I think now is the time that people want to know, what is your life like? What's going on the ground? I also think that your stories, especially if they're have a positive spin, I think people really want to hear something happy right now. The news is incredibly depressing. And if you're able to give them a story of a beneficiary that's been really positively impacted by your organization, I think that's like, balm for the soul right now. So when possible, like, lead with, personal stories, and also try to do something that's positive. I think right now people are getting bombarded with negativity, and that's usually where our attention goes. But if you can be that, positive light, I think that really matters. And people are really looking to cling on to something that's positive right now. I would also, if you feel comfortable, let them know how October 7th impacted you, personally, or you as an organization. I wouldn't say to do this on a mass scale. This isn't like something that you should be blasting out on a newsletter, but it could be something that you share with, like, your top 10 or your top 20 donors. Because I think that what I've learned through my decade and a half in fundraising is, people don't give to organizations, people give to people. And people give to people that they like and that they can connect with. So if you're not afraid to show that when that feels appropriate, and I'm sure it doesn't always feel appropriate, use that with someone that you feel safe with, and see how it goes, and see if there's something that can be built there, just in terms of your relationship. I'd also say, don't be afraid to hop on the phone. I think that people, or, suggest an in-person meeting. Everything right now is being done over the phone, text, emails. And I think we're really, like, in a loneliness pandemic, it feels like, at least in the US. And phone conversations and coffee meetings can actually go really far. I've raised way more money in person than I ever have over, any sort of email that goes out or crowdfunding thing. So if you can, you know, like, phone is better than email, and then a coffee in person is better than phone. So just, like, think about ways to make it more personal, because you can connect with people better there. There's something that's really missing when we're, like, on the screen all the time. And you can read their body language and kind of understand, like, oh, are they really into this? Or is there something else? Or they might come up with ideas. Speaking of coffee meetings, statistically, people are more generous before noon. No one really knows why that is. I think some of it is decision fatigue, that later on in the day, people just feel like they don't have time for anyone else. And so their thinking gets a bit more smaller and micro. So I would suggest, if you're sending out fundraising newsletters, if you're having donor calls, if you are, having coffee meetings, have it between like 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. So people's work hasn't hit them and they haven't thought about like, what do I have to have for dinner tonight? I mean, I went to the University of Michigan and I had this job. It was the worst job ever. I was a telemarketer for Hillel. And I would call people between the hours of 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. And no one ever wanted to hear from me. They were always eating dinner. They wanted to go to sleep. People would hang up and be so rude. And I really think that I can't believe I did that job for 3 years, but I really think that if I had called people in the morning, I would have had like better results. So that's something that I do want to share with you when you're having these in-person meetings, or even if you're just having calls. Another thing is it's really important not to meet them at their house, not to invite people to your house, not to meet them at their office, and also don't invite people to your office. I think that there's something to be said for the first meeting, at least, where you're having it in a coffee shop or you're having it at a breakfast spot. One is that it encourages people to be professional, and we're in a day and age where people can be unprofessional very quickly. So, meeting in this like safe third space is really critical. I would say if you can pick up the tab, like pay for their coffee, pay for their breakfast, it shouldn't bankrupt you. And people will feel like cared about. And so they'll feel like, oh, I should have done that. Okay. And then they feel more of this impetus to donate to you. So that's like another one of my tricks. It's also important that you're not meeting in their office, because as someone that used to do this for years and years, you get really distracted by things like, a photo of their kids and someone's like calling them and their assistants coming into the door. And if you can just have 45 minutes of like one-on-one time with a potential donor with no distractions other than like the waiter or waitress asking what you want, like that's prime material. I never ask for money on the first meeting. I think that people are always like scared that you're going to ask them for money. And you can kind of like address the elephant room in the beginning by just saying, hey, I don't want to ask you for money at this meeting. I just want to get to know you and understand what you're passionate about and what your values are and see if this aligns for us. And if not, I know other organizations. I can, direct you to OLAM to find another one. Like, you kind of want to come at these meetings with an abundance mentality. People really like that. They like the confidence that brings to you. I do think if you're having a second meeting, they're obviously interested. So that's when making an ask is really important. Something that kind of makes me cringe is when people just ask for support. Support us now. Give us general support. Like, what does that mean? I think it's really important that you're coming in with, we need $25,000 to do X program. We have one other donor, but it would mean so much if we could get you to commit to $18,000 by next Tuesday. Like I want you to have an amount, what it's going to, and then why it's urgent. The best asks are specific, they have a sense of urgency, and they just like don't leave any questions unanswered. The reason why I'm telling you this is because so many times I've gotten into meetings with people and we've asked for like support from someone who's worth like $100 million and they give us $360. Are you kidding me? Like, what is that? And like, I guess in a way it's our fault because we're not clear with our intentions of what we actually want and what will be meaningful for the organization. So when in doubt, like ask for a number that makes you like nervous and scared, and know that they can always come back to you and say something else, or maybe next year, or I can't do that, but here's half, just, overshoot when you can. You're always in a better position than if you undershoot or just ask for nothing. Another thing that I see people doing that it is kind of cringe is when they bring their laptops or they bring their iPads and they just show someone a PowerPoint. Because I think what happens is people lose focus. They're on screens all day. They want to see your face and connect with you. you can put PowerPoints later in an email. You can put bullet points to them. If it's really like critical that they watch a video, send them a link afterwards. But I've seen it happen so many times, and I think that there's something that gets lost when you force a screen upon someone in a fundraising meeting. So please don't do that. If you take away one thing from me, maybe it can be that. And another thing that I want to say, because I'm mostly speaking with people in Israel, a lot of people in the US want to go to Israel. They want an excuse to go, and the idea of just going without a purpose feels wrong. This is an opportunity for you, if your work is in Israel, or even if your work is elsewhere, to really engage on field visits if you find that appropriate. I'm getting invites all the time for mission trips, and maybe that's something that you don't have the bandwidth to do, but it is something that you will save for, like, a few months down the road when you do have time for that. I also think that you could create something virtually if you wanted to engage with people and to show them like what your organization does. But if you can have people connect with your work in person, nothing speaks as loud as seeing your work up close and personal. And then the last thing I want to talk about, especially because I'm a corporate partnerships person, is engaging with companies. It's really tricky right now. I feel like very few companies want to be seen as taking a side. And how I see that at HIAS is that we'll have, a company saying, listen, we'd love to give you this amount of money. However, we can't unlock that money until we find an organization that's working with Palestinians doing the same thing. And maybe some of you are running into this, and it's incredibly tricky. So what I would say to you is, if you want to engage with companies right now, the way to do that is with Jewish employee resource groups. So, for instance, my best friend works at Google, and they have Juglers. So they have like Jewish Googlers from around the world, and they host events. So you can approach them and say, hey, would you like to have a speaker on the work that I'm doing in Israel, or the work that I'm doing as an Israeli organization in Ethiopia or Rwanda? And chances are, because Jewish employees of tech companies, finance companies, pharma companies are feeling particularly isolated right now. As Mandie said, like it's this thought, everyone hates us, we feel alone. People are really looking to come together in their workplace. And so this is a big strategy for you. So you can give a talk. It can be 20 minutes on the work that you do, have a Q&A at the end, and then like post a link for people to donate. Usually these companies will match the donation amount, and sometimes it will unlock funds. So for instance, I did something with the Jewish Resource Group of American Express a few months ago. And it's just talking about HIAS's work in general, particularly in Eastern Europe. And then when the conflict happened, when October 7th happened, they reached back out to us and said, hey, we'd like to nominate you for a $500,000 grant. So what you'll see is, by being in this like Jewish resource group world, you're able to unlock these grant opportunities before they go public. And also, we're finding more and more that companies are giving to nonprofits that they're already connected with. So if they've already had one event from you, chances are they trust you. Okay, they know you, you're a friendly face. And now, okay, it's Giving Tuesday and we want to give you $50,000. We see this a lot more often than you would think. And a company like Google actually has a giving week at the end of the year where each Googler is allowed to give, I think, between $6,000 and $10,000 of Google's money, not even their money, to each nonprofit to any nonprofit, or they can split it up between a few nonprofits. So you might be able to find out about giving programs that you didn't even know just by engaging. And the way to do that is we all have friends who work at companies. Ask them, hey, do you have a Jewish employee resource group? They don't know? Cool. They can send an email to their HR for you. Then they find out who that person is. They connect them to you, and then you pitch, a virtual event, an in-person event, and then you can talk about fundraising with them like for the event and then also after the event. Awesome. Last thing I'm going to say is that if you're interested in corporate partnerships, I am teaching a corporate partnerships crash course that I would love to have a bunch of OLAM members at, and I can drop that information in the chat and would love to see some of you there. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Yael and Diana so we can do some Q&A.
So we're just going to open up the floor for the next 10 minutes or so. Feel free to either jump in or raise an actual hand or a virtual hand, and either direct your question to Mandie or to Erin or just to the group at large.
Or if anybody feels comfortable with a particular dilemma and using this as kind of a clinic space as well, that's also good. That was okay.
I'll also just pose the question, is there anything that was said here that either deeply resonates with you and your experience is the same, or something that your experience is opposite and therefore the group can benefit from sharing? That would be helpful insight to share as well. Ariel.
Thank you everyone for your important insights. If I can be a little blunt, I think we received a lot of interesting and valuable insights and tips, but we didn't really discuss the elephant in the room. Perhaps we could do it now, because Israeli and Jewish organizations who work in remote areas of the world are always at the bottom of the list in regular days. Now they're not at the bottom, they're off the list. So a lot of the insights that were given here are extremely important, but I think the big elephant in the room is what to do at this situation, because no one is interested in an Israeli or Jewish organization that works in Nepal or Cambodia or anywhere in Africa, at least from what I know and what I experience. And I do see organizations like Israel, who really shifted their work to Israel and hired hundreds of new employees and raised a lot of money, and it's good for Israel and good for them. But I know a lot of small organizations, and I'm not including myself. Baruch Hashem, we're doing fine, but I know a lot of organizations who aren't even doing any activity because they can't even go abroad. So I think that's the big elephant in the room, and maybe HIAS, who I think is one of the most well-known, if not the most well-known organization in the Jewish world working, in developing countries. Maybe you could tell us how you deal with that challenge.
Yeah, let me try to take it, and then I'd love to pass it on to Mandie or Diana or Yael. Yeah, it's been really tricky for us to fundraise for our work. We have a huge response in Chad, a country that most people cannot locate on a map. As a Jewish organization, right? Like all 100% of our staff there are Muslim and French speaking. It's not a sexy sell. We've had a very difficult time fundraising for that. We also have programs in Kenya. We have programs in Venezuela, Ecuador, which is a political nightmare right now, with so much instability. So we are really struggling when it comes to fundraising for those countries. I will say what I'm seeing is that we've shifted our focus to appeal to donors, like direct donors with like our newsletter and webinars, really focusing on our work in Israel, as well as some of our work on the border with US and Mexico and the Darien Gap. Those seem to be the areas of most donor interest right now. And what we're doing elsewhere, the like less sexy areas, is we're applying for government funding, or we're appealing to Jewish family foundations that have traditionally funded in that area, or have done things like funded genocide research. There's a huge conflict in Sudan. It's getting no attention. And that's been happening for decades now. And so we are trying to get government funding in these places where just really like donors are drying up. We do see government funding opportunities through government agencies, which is like a positive that we're seeing, at least under the Biden administration. I don't know if I can say that these opportunities will be there in a few months from now. So please look at US funding, US government funding, if that, writing those grants is a nightmare also. So it's not without fail. And then also seeing what Jewish family foundations have traditionally funded in that area or within those sorts of conflicts, and appealing to those. But I agree, it is the elephant in the room. It's so tricky right now.
I'll share a hypothesis that someone shared with me. I haven't yet seen it pan out. I hope this is true. But within Jewish philanthropy, since October 7th, people have moved in a more tribal or particularistic direction. But what that also means is that there are Jews who were funding non-sectarian development or aid organizations, who may now, for the first time ever, be interested in funding organizations that have a Jewish or Israeli touch point, that, are funders who were always interested in a particular region of the world, a particular, subject matter, whether it's global health or refugees or climate change, who up until now, almost all of their giving was exclusively in non-sectarian entities, that this may have actually opened up a window because they're feeling loneliness, perhaps for the first time in some of those spaces, to be funding Jewish or Israeli organizations. How do you find those people? What does that look like? I don't know, but that is a hypothesis to me that does seem to ring true, seeing the greater trends of moving in a more tribal direction. And I think that could be a possibility. I haven't seen it pan out yet.
So just riffing on that a little bit, I think that's true, but I also think that in many cases, the people who would fund, and we're talking about the Jewish donor base here, who would fund US Fund for UNICEF or Action Aid, or possibly not Red Cross, but certainly I know very few Jews at the moment who, I know a lot of people who pulled their gifts to the Red Cross to back up what Deanna's saying. But most people give to 5 or 6 or 7 different organizations that deal with a similar theme. Okay, well, maybe it's 2 or 3. So actually what you're saying is that actually your gift, if you have got any of these people who would give to a number of different entities, all dealing with the question of children's rights or women's rights or whatever it would be, or economic development, some more of that money that would have been going to those non-Jewish entities may now come to you if you have those contacts. But I think from your comment, I think the thing that I most take away, Ariel, is that it really isn't one size fits all, and that you need to look really, really closely at your current, which I'm sure you're doing, but your current range of donors and different types of donors. And to a certain extent, you may be able to group them and decide what your strategy is for different groups. But actually, it's really quite individual. But if you're not engaging, if you're not having those conversations, you actually don't know where people are, whether there are opportunities. And the other thing I would say is, this has always been the case, in terms of, anybody who's, every time there was a major disaster anywhere, and then all your development work would go into the background because everybody was absolutely focused on what was happening in Haiti or in Sri Lanka or in India or wherever. So this is more extreme, I think, in many senses, because it's so deeply impacted our own community. But a lot of it is also, you know, really thinking as well about the short term and the medium term, but also the long term. Now, I know that's a luxury, right? Because some people, you know, you're even going to get to the long term in terms of financial income at the moment. So and I don't pretend to understand what that is like. But I do think at the moment there are opportunities, even in this difficult time, and we are used to, as a sector, we are used to that. We are used to attention drying up. We're used to not being the focus, but the impetus on us is also to communicate. But it's really interesting what you say, Diana. I think there is huge opportunity there. The question that I would have for Olam, and sorry to put you on the spot, is there anything we can do to kind of like understand whether that is just, you know, to move that from a hypothesis? Is there anything active we can do? Can we talk to those people? Can we create a consortium? Because I know they're out there.
I know
We're
Michal.
definitely thinking in that direction. But I'd love to think more offline with it, whoever would be interested in that conversation.
Diana, I don't know if you saw that Michal has her hand up.
Michal, and I think that Michal will be our second and last question.
Okay, great. First of all, thank you so much. It's very interesting. We have a very large non-Jewish donor base, institutional, and then also a bit non-institutional. And we actually had a dilemma in the sense that we had one of our we had someone who wanted to give a donation and asked us for our stance on whatever happened in Gaza, and in the sense of saying, you know, like we're looking for a humanitarian partner, not a sectarian partner. And there, I have to say, we kind of like said, you know, we see the tragedy of both sides. But we are an Israeli organization, and we never got that donation, but it was something that was kind of like unexpected from our point of view in that sense. So I wanted to say that and kind of like throw that as dilemma, see if that's something that happened to anyone else. And the other thing that I want to say is resonate with what Mandie said. We are not focusing on the Jewish community right now. We're focusing more on institutional funding, on creating new programs, on creating new partnerships, on kind of like on pushing on that one. And at least from our point of view, we don't see any change on that. Like we have institutional funding coming from the UK, from the US, from Europe. We have new partners that are coming on. It seems like they're, at least in our sector, it hasn't tainted the kind of like the partnerships. So it's also maybe something to say that we have consciously taken a step back on fundraising in the Jewish community at this point.
Mandie, Erin, do either one of you want to respond shortly, and then we'll turn it over to Tanya?
This isn't a response, but I did want to tell you all about this incredible program that HIAS is a part of that I think would, while it wouldn't bring you money, it would maybe save you money. And it's called Airlink, and they give our staff free flights to Israel, to Ukraine. I just took a free flight to Ecuador with them, and they support a lot of OLAM's partners already. So it's not going to make you money, but it will save you money. You can let them know I sent you, and I know the team there and they're wonderful. They also host events every now and then, and will fly your staff there. So just like another lovely group to belong to. I'll throw that website in the chat. Sorry. Someone else can go.
No, the only thing I would add, sorry.
Just wanted to add that at SID, we're actually coordinating with Airlink, and people that would like to, Israeli organizations that like to be in touch, please talk to me so we can have like all the paperwork like go easier for you. So you can write me an email or in the chat. I'll be happy to explain more. Thank you.
All
Mandie?
right. Thank you very much. We'll hands over to Tanya.
Thanks. I think Mandie wanted to say one thing, or
No,
and
I
then
mean,
I'll.
the only thing I want to say is that please, I'll also post my Gmail. I think that there's obviously competition in our sector, right? Because we have similar pools of donors, or even if we don't, this is really a time, I think, for coming together as much as possible. I do believe that that the benefit of working together and sharing dilemmas and struggles, and we're all coming at it from a slightly different angle, is really, really important. And the sector, like the international development, Jews and Israelis doing development, which is the whole point of OLAM, is so essential. And for me, it has never felt more important than the juncture we're at now, even with all the immediate needs. And I think the challenge is to make sure that people, we continue to remind people that that is the case, that we can't be isolated as a people, even if people are trying to isolate us. So I just wanted to give that kind of positive long-term approach to what you are all doing, which I think is really, really incredible and essential for so many people, but also really important for us as a people. So thank you. And please be in touch.
So that kind of ties in nicely to what I was going to say, that we have another session of sharing dilemmas and a global meetup where you'll have opportunities specifically to speak about the war in Gaza and the challenges faced by our ecosystem, working with international partners, not just on fundraising, but on other topics as well. That's going to be happening on February 14th at 5 o'clock Israel time, 5 p.m. Israel time. And we'll be hearing from Idan Malkovich from Israel, from Gerald Kilstein from the Center of Development History, and from Diana Ginsburg. And it's a great opportunity also to meet and expand your network, also share dilemmas. I really agree with you. I think it's crucial that we speak about difficulties, challenges, and from there we can develop and learn onwards. Sorry. And I just wanted to touch upon another challenge which we didn't speak about here, and maybe we can speak about in the global meetup, was the fact that it's more difficult to travel now for Israelis meeting potential donors, and you're absolutely right, Erin, that we can't, like, you can't do the ask in the initial meeting, and it's difficult to make those connections and partnerships from afar, and that's something that I think we need to think about how we can bridge that, maybe through new partnerships and new partnerships with either existing or with other organizations, or our new partnerships that are abroad, and maybe that would be a better solution for Israelis that are right now really just located at home and finding it difficult to travel to fundraise as well. On that note, thank you so much to Erin and to Mandie, to the OLAM and SID team as well, and to all of you for participating. And I know that our two teams would be happy to continue this dialogue and hear from you, and see if there's any additional meetups that we can do in order to help facilitate this dialogue further.
בהצלחה.
Thank you so much. תודה רבה.